Chapter 16. Conditions had improved in the outsiders' camp since the raid on the Scotty farm. As the band moved south through Araluen, Tennyson had continued to send parties out to raid isolated farms that they passed. They brought back not just food, but also equipment to make their camp more comfortable: canvas, timber, and rope to make tents, and furs and blankets to keep out the chill of the cold northern nights. In the last raid, they had also chanced upon 4 horses. They were sorry animals, but at least now Tennyson and the 2 Genovesans could ride instead of walking. The 4th horse he needed for another purpose. Now, as he sat in the relative comfort of his tent, he explained it to the young man he had chosen to be its rider. "Durkin, I want you to ride on ahead," he said. "Take one of the horses and make your way to this village." He indicated a spot on a roughly drawn map of the northeast. "Willie's Flat," the young man said, reading the name of the spot Tennyson had indicated. "Exactly. It's just beyond this range of cliffs, a little to the south of them. Look for a man named Barrett." "Who is he?" the messenger asked. Normally, Tennyson didn't encourage his followers to question orders, but on this occasion, it would help if the young man knew why he needed to make contact with Barrett. "He's the leader of a local chapter of our people. He's been recruiting converts in this area for the last few months. I want you to tell him to gather however many followers he's managed to convert, and we'll rendezvous at a campsite near the cliffs." Always planning to gain a foothold in Araluen once more, Tennyson had sent 2 groups of followers to establish the cult in remote areas, well away from the eyes of officialdom. One had been at Selsey, the fishing village on the west coast. The second had been here, in the wild northeastern part of the kingdom. The last message he'd had from Barrett had indicated that he'd managed to convert, or rather recruit, around 100 followers to the religion. It wasn't a lot, but Barrett wasn't an inspiring figure. And 100 followers was a start, at least. They'd provide gold and jewelry Tennyson would need to start up again. The young man looked with interest at the map. "I thought we were the only group," he said. Tennyson's brows came together angrily. "Then you thought wrong," he told him. "A wise man always has something in reserve in case things don't go according to plan. Now, get going." Durkin shrugged the implied rebuke aside and stood to leave. "But it'll probably take a few days for this Barrett character to get the people assembled." "Which is why I'm sending you on ahead," Tennyson told him, a sarcastic note creeping into his voice. "But if you plan to stand around talking about it, I might have to find someone else for the job." Durkin heard the tone and capitulated. Truth be told, he'd be happy to ride on ahead. He stuffed the map inside the breast of his jacket and turned towards the entrance of the tent. "I'm on my way," he said. Tennyson's angry grunt was the only response. Durkin headed for the entrance and was forced to step back as another figure entered hurriedly, bumping into him. An angry complaint rose to the young man's lips, and then he bit it off as he recognized the newcomer. It was one of the Genovesan assassins whom Tennyson had retained as bodyguards. They were not people to insult or annoy, Durkin knew. Hastily, he mumbled an apology and scuttled round the purple-cloaked figure, leaving the tent as quickly as he could. Maurice curled his lip in contempt as he glanced after the young man. He was well aware that many of the foreigners avoided him and his compatriot. Tennyson glanced up at him now, frowning slightly. Since they had acquired the horses, the 2 Genovesans had begun to check their trail every few days to be sure nobody was following them. It was a routine measure that Tennyson had insisted on, and so far there had been nothing to report. But now that Maurice was here, Tennyson suspected that there was bad news. Bakari, the senior of the two, only reported when the news was good. "What is it?" Tennyson demanded. "We're being followed," Morisi replied, with that inevitable, infuriating shrug of the shoulders. Tennyson slammed his fist down on the small folding table they'd stolen from a farmhouse some days ago. "Damn! I knew things were going too smoothly. How many of them are there?" "3, the Genovesan told him, and his spirits rose a little. 3 people following them was nothing to be concerned about. But the assassin's next words changed his mind. "They're the 3 from Hibernia, the 2 cloaked archers and the knight." Tennyson came out of his chair with the shock of the news. It tumbled over backwards onto the grass, but he didn't notice. "Them?" he shouted. "What are they doing here? How the devil did they get here?" Again, the Genovesan shrugged. How they got here was immaterial. They were here, and they were following behind the small band of outsiders. And they were dangerous. That much he already knew. He waited for the self-styled prophet to continue. Tennyson's mind raced. The smuggler. He must have told them. Of course, they would have bribed him, and he would have taken their money and betrayed the outsiders. He began to pace up and down the restricted space inside the makeshift tent. This was bad news. He needed to gather the faithful at Willie's flat. He needed the gold and jewelry he'd get there, and he'd be delayed while they came in from their outlying farms. He couldn't take the risk that the 3 Araluans might catch up with him. "How far back are they?" he asked. He should have asked that immediately, he thought. Morisi curled his lips thoughtfully. "Not far. A day at most." Tennyson considered the answer, then came to a decision. A day was not enough of a lead, particularly when he was held down to a walking pace. He looked up at the assassin. "You'll have to get rid of them," he said abruptly. Morisi's eyebrows went up in surprise. "Get rid of them?" he repeated. Tennyson leaned across the little table, his fists planted on the rough wood. "That's right. That's what you people do, isn't it? Get rid of them. You and your friend. Kill them. Use those crossbows you're so proud of and make sure they stop following us." Damn them, he thought. Those cowled archers and their muscular friend had been nothing but trouble for him. Now, the more he thought about it, the more he wanted to know they were dead. Morisi had been considering his order. He nodded thoughtfully. "There's a good spot where we can ambush them. We'll have to go back and lay a trail for them to follow. But of course—" He paused meaningfully. For a few seconds, Tennyson didn't register the fact. Then he snarled. "Of course what?" "They're dangerous enemies, and our contract said nothing about getting rid of people like them." The implication was obvious. Tennyson breathed heavily, controlling his rising anger. He needed these 2 men, no matter how much they infuriated him. "I'll pay you extra," he said, his teeth gritted. Morisi smiled and held out a hand. "Now? You'll pay now?" But Tennyson shook his head violently. He wasn't going to capitulate quite so far as that. "When you've done the job," he said, "I'll pay you then, not before." Morisi shrugged again. He hadn't really expected that the heavy-set preacher would agree to paying in advance, but it had been worth a try. "You'll pay later," he said. "We'll arrange a fee, but if you pay later, you pay more." Tennyson swept that fact aside carelessly with one hand. "That's fine. Tell Bakari to come and see me, and we'll agree on a payment." He paused, then added for emphasis, "Later." After all, he thought, with any luck, they might all kill each other and save him the extra payment.